Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq, coming to you live from Day 3 of the Fintech Festival in Singapore. Joining me for this segment, we have Kim Rosenkilde. He's a Chief Investment Officer over at Singlife with Aviva. We're going to talk about nurturing the fintech ecosystem and some of the challenges that face it right now. Kim, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about ESG for a moment here. It's a strategic pillar and a focus with Singlife. Tell us more about that.
Well, we have an obligation, a fiduciary obligation to look after our policyholders, and we want to get the best returns for them. This is where the money is at the moment. So we're first and foremost looking at what kind of returns we can get. I'm a great believer in the whole energy transition that's happening in the world. There's about $2.5 trillion that needs to be put to work in this part of the world alone. So for me, it's a way of looking at it is that I feel very safe that we can get the money back and hopefully with a return. But of course, we're also an insurance company. We sell protection. And it's almost implicit that you kind of have to look after the community you're in if you sell that. And that's why we try and engage ourselves both in the climate talks, of course. I am on the advisory council for the Climate Impact Exchange here. We do a lot with issuers in town when it comes to green bonds or some of their ESG-related funds. We are co-founder with Temasek's Azalea in an ESG fund, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we have an explicit need to be in this market, but we do it from a return perspective to start with.
Right. Well, what about the sphere of responsible investing at Singlife? How do you approach that?
So we are a co-signature of UNPSI, and we're about to join UNPRI. We use a company called Matter, which you are acquainted with through Nasdaq. As an investor, Matter gives us a very quick and very forensic look into our investments. We also use, when we do, especially on the alternative side, where it's a little bit more opaque at times, we will use Allborn Partners as a sort of consultant to help us to go through all the due diligence. But I will also tell you that I think our team has a very stern and industrial approach to this. We ask the tough questions. You cannot be an investment officer at Singlife without having passed a form of ESG validation and certification. So we take it quite serious.
What about the challenges and hurdles that are being faced when you're nurturing this evolution within the fintech ecosystem?
And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated because you can, as you can tell here, there's an enormous effort being made. We certainly embrace all both the local advancement that is being done. MAS is a fantastic supporter here, as is Temasek of the local community, and that's what we're trying to tap into. But there's also so much to learn from other markets. Last night we hosted a reception with the Nordic Fintech group, and where Matter is part of, and that's for us to bring some good things into the country that can then also evolve. But as you know, Matter won an MS accelerator, and it's already tied to the country. But it's also going beyond that, right? Because I chair our Navigator company, which is a platform for financial advisors. Mm-hmm. The financial advisor industry here is about 6,000 to 8,000 financial advisors that looks after regular investors like me and my wife and the taxi drivers and so on. So there we try and certainly use tools from fintech that you see around here to enlighten and educate the advisor himself so he can have a better discussion with his client.
Right.
So for us it's B2B2C, so we have to educate them first and foremost, help them tell their clients that in order to put a child through school, this is the calculation, this is the tool that we use. So there's an enormous evolution going on in that. And at Navigator we're investing very heavily and we've been working with the Economic Development Board here as well to facilitate that. Singapore can also be a center for the rest of the region, where we certainly have some ambitions, as do many, and we want to take these platforms out to the rest of the region in terms of Southeast Asia.
It's interesting because in the US as well, fintech in the advisor community is certainly growing, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And you had said 6,000 to 8,000 advisors are within the region here. That doesn't really sound like a lot for the amount of people that are.
I said in Singapore.
In Singapore, but even still, it sounds it's such a dense population that there sounds like there is a growth opportunity there.
It's a very big country in many ways, but in terms of population, maybe not. Right.
Right, but it sounds like there's growth opportunity there.
Absolutely, but even more so probably outside as
Right.
well, right? We have a very strong pension system here in the country called the Provident Fund. So all of us contribute together with our employer, and in that fund, which is very sizable, most of the savings take place. It's what's over that we help out with,
Right.
some of the funds that sits in there. But the ESG problem that we started out by
Right.
talking about, and especially on the climate side, we understand you can't really do climate without doing financial inclusion. We are surrounded by countries where there's very low average income. There is a necessity to use some of these fossil fuels in order just to switch the light on. And you are dependent on maybe a revenue from mining, for instance. Mm-hmm. So we think that financial inclusion is a very important factor, so we try and invest in that. But we also try not to be sort of, forgive me, too sanctimonious,
right.
which is what Westerners sometimes are when they come here, and they sort of want to apply what the Dutch pension fund does in Holland. It doesn't necessarily work out here. A lot of our customers or policyholders will have some form of connection to areas in this part of the world where there is a necessity for fossil fuels.
Right.
So we are a great believer in the transition. And this is where it becomes complicated sometimes. Again, you have to accept that your scores, if you want, are not perfect from day one. You try and be an activist and an influencer. Mm-hmm. So you sell an old mine and you buy a new mine that pollutes 30% less,
right.
for instance, and so forth.
Well, it's a great point that you bring up, because I feel like with the climate movement, and while it's necessary to your point, I don't think it could be an either-or situation. That there needs to be some patience exercised as the technology evolves and as the economies evolve and you're able to scale so that people can be included from a financial perspective. So I think this either-or scenario might not be as effective as more transition-focused scenario.
Certainly. I mean, it's also not possible.
Right, right.
I mean, that's a good place to begin. And again, I see we have a lot of asset managers coming through our office and talking about this, and I think they see it sometimes through the wrong prism, maybe.
Right.
And here we have to understand that we're certainly having the largest carbon footprint. And that needs to be addressed, but it's also something, of course, that the carbon footprint gets exported, right? Because a lot of the things that are being made here are exported and consumed elsewhere.
Right.
So there has to be this transition, otherwise it won't work simply. And that can be difficult as an investor to understand.
Yeah. All right, Kim, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining me at the Singapore Fintech Festival. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.